portraits right there. I don't know if you can see them, but do come by and look at them later. There's one of Ethan, one of Irene, and one of Dick Lewis. And they were done by Boyd Carr. And so they're caricatures of them, so I thought it was kind of neat. I asked him to do that. And so I just take note of those when you have the opportunity afterward. And to open this little memorial remembrance, which is probably redundant, but I just like the two words together, I've asked Mark Harshman, our poet laureate, to say a few words to begin.
Well, we lost some great ones, didn't we, this past year? I was at the Appalachian Studies Conference and was with Maggie Anderson, and she was remembering Irene, and although I didn't know Ethan well, I thought it fitting that I say something about Ethan, and this seems like a good little piece to start with today for all of those we've lost this past year. He has a little poem at the beginning of this volume called Again and Again. It's a translation from Rilke. And it goes like this. Again and again, even if we know love's landscape, the churchyard small with its mourned names, the grim slot of silence where others end, again and again we go out, two of us under the old trees, to lie down again and again among flowers, facing the sky. There's a poem of Irene's that I'll use here in a moment. When I was asked on public radio a couple weeks ago to talk about this laureateship, thankfully I got to talk about Irene, and I just, all I could say was that she was a wonderful, wonderful poet, immensely talented, not afraid to tackle difficult subjects, always spoke her mind, was truly a product of all that's the best in West Virginia in every way that I can think of it. Had an ear for the music of the language, and yet could cut to the heart of the matter, speak the truth of the littlest things with just an image. She really was a gift. And beyond that, as you folks sitting here know as well, she was a tremendous supporter of writers throughout this state, and was very generous with her time, generous with children as well as us old folks. And so we have truly lost a treasure when we think of Irene's passing from us. I think probably the last time I saw her was a time that had been repeated for a couple of years in a row at the West Virginia Writers at the West Virginia Book Festival in Charleston, and sitting with her in the green room. And even though I knew from friends that she was going through this awful battle with illness, she was so completely comfortable in her own skin, and just a joy and an ease to talk with. And I will always think of her with a true fondness and real gratitude. She has a poem that seems to me a really right poem when one thinks about the end of life, and it's the last poem in her second book, I think, second full-length book, Quick Fire and Slow Fire from North Atlantic, and the poem is called Right, and it's always hard to hear a poem the first time maybe, so just think rain as you're hearing this poem as well. Right. And it is always right, even when we have plans. The swoop of its hands like a blind child's feeling our faces. The times I hoped it wouldn't rain so I could go on ungerminate. My disappointment and joy. Not two minds, but a quick shudder flickering in the rain of early morning. How can I tell myself what it tells me? What falls on us all falls rightly. We need to be washed without asking. Under the thick laurel leaves in West Virginia, beside the fog-soothed stucco walls in Santa Cruz, in the white valley of Salt Lake City, I attend the rain, and when it calls, I kneel and make my appearance. I couldn't help but think, as I thought of these passings, of one of my favorite lines from Virginia Woolf. And I want to think of Irene and Dick and Ethan when I read these lines, because you know they were all great readers. All of us who are writers are great readers first. And Virginia Woolf, in her Second Common Readers, said, "Yet who reads to bring about an end, however desirable? Are there not some pursuits that we practice because they are good in themselves, and some pleasures that are simply final? And is not this among them? I have sometimes dreamt, at least, that when the day of judgment dawns, and the great conquerors and lawyers and statesmen come to receive their rewards, their crowns, their laurels, their names carved indelibly upon imperishable marble, the Almighty will turn to Peter and will say, not without a certain envy, when he sees us coming with our books under our arms, look, these need no reward. We have nothing to give them here. They have loved reading. And may I add, writing. So God bless them all."
Thank you, Mark. And next up is Kirk Judd, who wrote a poem to Irene.
Well, it's a poem I wrote at the last workshop I took from Irene here about 6 years ago, and I think it's appropriate because, like Mark said, she was going through this terrible personal ordeal, but she never let that affect her ability to support the rest of us, which we greatly appreciated. It doesn't have a title. This morning, gray, light, and rain. I laugh at the clock, smile at the pillow, and miss breakfast again. Today, I wrap poems around me. Sherelle and Ed and Susanna and John blanket me with words. Now, they soak into my skin, fill me with wonder. Be happy, Irene says, dying. And one little short poem, it's titled, Nothing Loved Dies. Nothing loved dies.
Wonderful. Thank you. I was going to read a couple of my favorite poems of Irene's. I had the privilege and honor to interview Irene a few years ago for an article for Wonderful West Virginia magazine, and she let me come to her house and see some of her thousands upon thousands of books and talk writing and her Buddhism, and fascinating, diverse lady. And there are two poems that make me think so much of her. This one is, and you'll recognize, I'm sure a lot of you, it's Stained. I'm stained with the iron red water from the mines, and I'm stained with tobacco and red wine and the rust of perpetual loss. Near Maybe, West Virginia, I pulled off the narrow road one morning on my way to work as a substitute teacher. I wanted to stand there a while to see how bad it was. My shuddering in 10-degree weather on my way to something that couldn't possibly matter. I had quit smoking, and I felt like a squirrel about to be shot, looking around in a frenzy. There was a squirrel there, not afraid at all, turning a hickory nut in its hands and ignoring me. I must have looked like what I was, a woman who had lost her bearings and refused to admit it. It was another day in my history of posthumous days, another day when nobody touched my body. And then this last one that I think is quite appropriate, and it's one of the favorites all over the state and probably the world, of Irene's. Visiting my gravesite, Talbot Churchyard, West Virginia. Maybe because I was married and felt secure and dead at once, I listened to my father's urgings about the future and bought this double plot on the hillside with a view of the bare white church, the old elms, and the creek below. I plan now to use both plots, luxuriantly spreading out in the middle of a big double bed. But no, finally, my burial has nothing to do with my marriage. This lying here in these same bones will be as real as anything I can imagine. For who I'll be then, as real as anything undergone, going back and forth to the world out there and here to this one spot. On earth I really know. Once I came in fast and low in a little plain, and when I looked down at the church, the trees I felt with my hands, the neighbors' houses and the family farm, and I saw how tiny what I loved and knew was. It was like my children going on with their plans and griefs at a distance, and nothing I could do about it. But I wanted to reach down and pat it, while letting it know I wouldn't interfere for the world being everything this isn't, this unknown buried in the known. And next, we have Tom Gonlin, who's going to speak about Ethan.
This is not an acrobatic trick. I'm here with Ethan's wife, Ushi, if you haven't met Ushi. We came down from the Shepherdstown area, the very eastern tip of the state. I was an adjunct writing instructor at Shepherd University, then college, back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I wanted to do that as a career. And then I couldn't because I had kids and I had to get, a corporate job. But Ethan Fischer took my spot there at Shepherd. And I watched for nearly 20 years Ethan living the life that I wish that I could have lived. And realized after a while that Ethan was unbelievably fit for that job. He was the right person there, and he was legendary. He had followings of amazing numbers of people, even here, as I've come here for the first time to hear people talk about Ethan Fischer. We have a group of poet people in Shepherdstown, and we meet once a month. And then occasionally we have this thing called Works on Walls, where poems are presented in an art gallery, and then we get together and read them. Well, Ethan was supposed to read last June, almost a year ago, and he wasn't feeling well enough, so I read his poems. And then at the memorial service in Shepherdstown, I got a chance to read another poem of his. And I will read that again. It's called Housework in Heaven, and it happens to be in Kestrel. There's no housework in heaven, so clouds of unknowing lie thick under beds. Like cobwebs, light beams collect in high corners. And old shirts the angels shed shroud whole worlds. Yet too good tend to be the angels when they are not making make-believe love, showing up at garden parties, stopping a filial sacrifice, or starting some crusade. They are guarding someone. Hard to talk to. Angels are too apt to wing off or to vanish the way love goes. Although an angel may wrestle you all night or deliver a message or descend in fire, earth for us is close enough to heaven. Always we have each other, and we vacuum. I have a second poem, which I believe is Ethan's last poem. It's called New Choir Choice. Soon, perhaps, I shall join my voice to the deep choir thrilling underneath ground. Our director knows the soil shifts of music, and directs us down and up. The audience has grown hungry, but they stay for a while. Sensing a legend here, dying or being born. Go, Ethan.
Can I say something about that? This poem I had all of a sudden, when he got sicker and sicker, I had the feeling like this panic. I don't know what this last poem is. Like, I need to know this. So he couldn't write anymore, so I said to him, you owe me another poem. And he started talking, and he read it. He just said it, and I wrote it down what he said. And then the next morning, I gave it to him, and he said, is this how you want it to be written? He said, oh, good, that's good. And I don't know, it was just, I needed to know. So I thought it was an interesting, and I love the poem. And it's going to be, I think, in some anthology.
Yes, it's going to be in the new West Virginia Writers Anthology. I chose that particular poem. She sent me several, and I chose that one, especially because it was his last one. It's perfect, definitely perfect. Yes.
He definitely had a sense where he was going.
Okay. Next, we have Eric Fritzius, who's going to read an excerpt of Dick Lewis's work.
We all have kind of the people that are at the West Virginia Writers Conference for whom we kind of think it's not going to be the conference unless we see these folks there. Ethan was definitely one of those guys. He was such a character and helped me out in any number of ways when I was president and planning conferences, and always threw in to be part of any dramatic readings we had during the Joe's Shorts when we had Joe McCabe's plays. He was excellent in one and reprised his role when we did the same play for the second Joe's Shorts. Dick Lewis is also one of those people. He and I joined the organization at about the same time in 2002, and he was parliamentarian and I was just a wee regional rep. And we would often, since we both lived in Lewisburg, we would often travel together to either come to the conference or to meetings for the board. And just those long trips from Lewisburg to Clarksburg to Elkins, sometimes going down twisty, windy back roads, trying to keep the speed limit in Summersville. The conversations that flowed out of that and hearing his backstory. My wife grew up in Alaska. He spent time in the military in Alaska and told me about the Wild West days of Anchorage, and just wonderful stuff. He and his wife had moved to Lewisburg and bought the Old Stone Manse, which was the manse for the Old Stone Presbyterian Church in downtown Lewisburg, this ancient building. They renovated it, opened a bed and breakfast, and one of the stories from that he has in his book, Naked Man's Rock, which I believe placed an honorable mention in our contest a couple years ago. Mysterious footprint in the Old Stone Manse. I'll just read a little bit of it for you. Late Saturday evening, after an all-day trip to Richmond, Virginia, my wife and I unrolled the new oriental rug on our old floor, recently stripped of a century of varnish and paint spots and other unidentified stains. The wood floor gave off a soft, warm glow. Virginia said, "Move the rug to the left about 3 inches." "Okay, how's that?" "About right." "What's that dark spot by your knee?" "I don't know. Let me get a better light on it." It was at this moment we found the mysterious footprint. We examined the print over and over. We traced our fingers around the edges of the heel and across the toes, feeling the rounded indentations in the wood. We examined the floor for other footprints, but found none. Had a child walked through a fresh coat of varnish when the oak floors were put down a century before? No, since the varnish was completely removed. How could this one footprint remain? One day my friend Nancy stopped by with another lady. Nancy said, "This is Lila. She's a psychic. We want to walk through your place. This house is so old there must be ghosts here." Lila was tall and striking with long black hair. She wore a bright red blouse with lots of gold chains around her neck. Her long skirt had a white background with black polka dots. Long dangling earrings pierced her ears. Rings sparkled on every finger. Bracelets floated around her wrists. Her nails were long and bright red. Her demeanor was distant. During the tour, she was visibly startled by the strong forces she sensed in the room where the footprint is located. Also, in one area outside the house next to the road, she reported a major temperature change. She said, "It will take several visits to find out more about the footprint. This spirit has been around here for a long time." We declined any further investigation. Our spirit seems friendly. Some guests have asked me, "Do you ever feel the presence of supernatural forces?" I've never fully answered that question. I could tell them that it's probably my imagination when out of the corner of my vision I see a shadow for the briefest part of a second, or get a cold chill when I sense that someone is staring at the back of my neck when I'm alone in the house. The footprint remains a mystery. Stand barefooted on a wood floor and press your toes hard against the floor. Did you make an imprint of your toes in the wood? Now you have an idea of the difficulty in explaining the origin of the print. It truly did exist. It was about yay long, a child's footprint, perfectly sculpted in the wood of one of the floorboards in the old stone manse. I don't think he actually had any of the ghostly experiences, and I'm not sure the psychic really came by, but Dick Lewis often set his short stories in a very similar place to the old stone manse. And for a man who was completely mild-mannered and the nicest guy you would ever meet, he often featured wives in his stories who were deceitful and murderous, and husbands who were plotting the death of their wives, and we kind of worried for Judy's sake. And we would attend workshops with Belinda Anderson's writing workshop that she would do twice a year, and we would always have our Christmas parties at Dick Lewis's house, and we would kind of watch their relationship. Is there any tension there? Do we need to be concerned? And there simply wasn't. She and Dick were just amazing people and continued to be forces for creativity and wonderful gardening throughout the Lewisburg area. He was a master gardener along with his wife, and wherever they lived, from the Old Stone Manse to a place on Jackson Street where they moved to, the plants flourished. When I was president of West Virginia Writers, we of course have the every 2 years struggle to find a writer that has some degree of financial skills that we can plug into the treasurer's position, because damn if any of us do. And I was lamenting that we were going to have to clone Patsy Pittman before we could get somebody to fill the treasurer's position, and was telling him that on one of our long car trips to a board meeting. And it wasn't long after that he agreed to accept the nomination for treasurer and bailed me out of a jam, and was wonderful in the job and did a lot for this organization. Anything you asked of him, he was there. Whether it was hauling boxes from what was then our storage unit in Lewisburg all the way over here in his truck, whatever you needed, Dick Lewis was there. He is, to me, West Virginia Writers in many respects, and he will be missed.
Now to conclude our little memorial remembrance today, we have a couple of songstresses who can sing a little song for us.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace The earth shall soon dissolve like snow. The sun or bear to shine, but God who called me below will be forever mine.
Thank you to Lisha and Kipper, and thank you all for coming here for this memorial remembrance. And I'm sorry about the sun. The guy showed up just to say we're singing to unlock, but it's worked out well. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the conference.